Welcome to Crank the Third podcast. This is the show where we explore the entrepreneurial and creative side of life post 50. My name is Trevor Young and today's guest is Paul Sutton. Paul is an independent social and digital marketing consultant of several decades standing. He has a strong reputation in that space, but that's not why we're going to be talking to him today, because he also produces and hosts, it's a show called Middleman, a podcast that helps men and their partners understand and navigate the challenges of midlife to lead more joyful, rewarding and meaningful lives. Welcome to the show, Paul. What were you doing 15 years ago?
Thank you. 15 years ago, I was working for a marketing agency, a communications agency here in the UK. At that time, things like Facebook and Twitter were kind of coming through from a marketing sense, but they weren't hugely established. But so social media was coming through. And just previous to that, I'd run my own business, an online business, and got to know my way around things like, social media, Google advertising, blogging, all the things that were around 15, 20 years ago and were kind of the spaces that communications people were moving into, but weren't really experienced in. And because I'd been doing this for my own business for a few years, I came back to the agency space and was suddenly in a lot of demand, so kind of lent into that. So 15 years ago I was doing that. I've now been an independent consultant for 11 years. Seems like a long time ago now, it really does.
Well, and in your space a lot has happened. So yes, 11 years, yeah. They're like dog years, 77 years, we'll call it quits.
It feels like it, believe me.
And you live in the English countryside, I recall.
Yeah, I live outside of Oxford, basically in the middle of nowhere. We moved into a 250-year-old former coaching inn in the countryside about 4 years ago, because we've been through all the lockdowns and all the COVID stuff, and we came. Well, in fact, it was during that we were looking for a house, but we just decided we wanted to get out of. I mean, we were living in a village anyway. It was not like we were in a huge town or a city or anything, but we just wanted space around us and found this place. And yeah, there's a couple of houses within sort of, I don't know, half a mile or something, but that's it. But yeah, it's great. We love it here.
Should start a YouTube channel of living in the English countryside and doing up a country homestead.
Well, you say that. Funny enough, not long after we moved in, I did start. I've been off Facebook and Instagram personally now, even though I do this for a living, for quite a number of years. And I went back to Instagram to start a channel about renovating this place. But it lasted, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, but I found myself hating Instagram as much as I did when I used it before. So I kind of quit that after not very long.
Well, you have got another love, and it's podcasting. So luckily You like that medium. I'm hoping you do. So Middleman is obviously a project that's meaningful and close to your heart. Why don't you tell us a bit more about it and why did you start it in the first place? And then we can dig in from there.
Yeah, sure. So the show, as you previously said in your introduction, is for midlife men and the people who are around them. So primarily that's going to be partners, but it could be anyone in the family or close friends or anything. But primarily it's aimed at midlife men. And when I say midlife, the core listenership is sort of 45 to 55, but you can extend it out to sort of 35 to 60, really, when I look at the sort of demographics.
Yep.
It covers a really broad range of topics that are specifically about the challenges you face in midlife. So, I mean, I've covered things. It's been going for 6 months now. I've covered things as broad as mental health, physical health in terms of nutrition, for example, and alcohol recently. But going back further, things like stress and burnout and more serious topics like suicide prevention, because suicide among this demographic is, if you look at all the demographics, it's the highest, middle-aged men. Yeah. So what it's all aimed at is trying to communicate with men about the things that they may come up against or are coming up against in midlife. And the reason I started this is because it was about a year ago, this time last year, spring last year, I kind of found myself in a really low spot. I've suffered from depression for 15, 20 years, diagnosed that is, but have learned over that time to deal with that. And I know that at the start of every year, I tend to feel a bit low because the weather in the UK in January, February is flipping awful. It's horrible, really grey, and it just gets me down. It gets a lot of people down, but it impacts me quite a lot. But this time last year, I went through that and came out the other side and just felt miserable. It's difficult to put words in this, but I've tried in the podcasts I've done. I felt very trapped in my life, and this is a life that I have designed for myself, but very felt very trapped in it. I felt lost. I felt directionless, and miserable is the only word I can really put to it. And I started looking around and thinking, because I'm always a firm believer that, I'm always a firm believer that I'm not special in terms of, if I'm feeling something, then I'm damn sure other people are going to be feeling something. And so I started looking around for information on midlife, really, and came across a book. In fact, it started off by thinking about purpose and thinking, I was kind of lost. I'm thinking, what is my purpose in the world? Which is, again, is a question that I know you've asked on this podcast. But what are we here for? I had this big, is this it question, you know? And I started looking around, and someone recommended me to a book written by someone in the UK. And as I read that, it was like light bulbs went on. I was like, oh, so that's what's wrong with me, which was all about this midlife transition. And so I found this one book and started looking around for more stuff. I just couldn't find anything. I mean, really very little focused on men. There's lots out there for women.
Yeah.
There's lots about menopause and perimenopause, which is brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I thank God that's happened as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of men and midlife transition and what goes on with us, it's just, if you look around, a lot of it is it's comedic laughing stock. It's, you know, guy gets to 45, goes out, gets a sports car, has an affair with a 20-year-old. It's that sort of stuff. It's not taken seriously.
Pretty cliche.
Yeah, absolutely. And so
Although
I started looking around.
It does happen.
I'm sure, yeah, probably still does. You're right. I'd like to think you're more
cliche for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But so book-wise, could find very little focused on men. I found one guy in the States who'd written a book about it, this guy in the UK, but other than that, virtually nothing. Online, like I said, it was all this stereotypical stuff. Podcast land, again, just a wasteland. I mean, it's great that you're doing this, and I've noticed a couple of others springing up in the last 6 months since I started mine, which is brilliant. But again, a bit of a wasteland, and the ones that I did find, I didn't resonate with me. They didn't talk to me. So basically, like you said, I'm a podcaster. I've been doing that for 5 years before that for my industry.
Yes.
So I decided, okay, well, if I think I feel like this, I'm damn sure other people must do. So I figured, right, I'm going to do a podcast on it, and I'll see how it goes. I had no expectations on it. Kind of thought, well, I'll put some stuff out there. If it goes, then brilliant. If it doesn't, fine. You know, I'll do a season, and that'll be that.
Yeah.
But that's why I came to it, and that's what it's all about, really.
And what I like about it is, I mean, this is a sideline to what you're doing, but obviously there's meaning there and there's purpose there.
Yeah.
And I guess you going down that, what sounded like a bit of a journey of self-discovery has led to this. Would that be fair?
Absolutely, 100%. It was all about self-discovery, because if I think about myself at this time last year, sort of March 24, I didn't know who I was. It sounds dramatic, but I had no clue who I was. I didn't know where my passion for life was. I'd lost that. I had no idea what I liked doing for fun, which sounds silly, maybe, but maybe a lot of people listening to this will go, yeah, because I went through a bunch of exercises, which I'm kind of formatting into a book at the moment, an ebook anyway. And one of those was to write a list of things that I enjoy. Not my kids, not my wife, me personally. If no one else existed around me, what would I doing? I started off with a blank sheet of paper, and it stayed blank for a long time. And it was just shocking to me that I could have got to, then I was 52, 51 maybe, and have this such lack of awareness of who I was. I'm like, who the hell am I? Which seemed, it's like I said, it seems ridiculous, but I now know that a lot of men get to this stage because, I'm emailed by a lot of men. I've heard from well over 100 men now since I started this podcast, and the common themes in that all revolve around this feeling of, I don't know who I am, I'm trapped, I'm lost, I don't have any passion in my life, I've lost my zest, all this sort of stuff, and it's seems to be incredibly common.
And I mean, you've had a lot of guests now who are, they're experts in their space.
Yeah.
As you said, across nutrition and health, but the earlier ones was probably more around the psychology and that side of things.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a good learning journey for you because as the curator of guests and then the editor of the questions and answers, I mean, as a podcaster, you can really start digging into deep, and because you've gone through it, you are the audience.
Absolutely. And I knew that from my previous podcast, which, like I said, was industry based. I learned so much from doing that. I mean, and you'll know this yourself. You sit down with someone, or most weeks, for an hour and just chat to them about whatever it is you want to talk about. And you learn so much from doing that. So, yes, I always said the podcast that I did for my industry was the best thing I ever did from a marketing standpoint. It positions you well. Your reputation is it really elevates from doing that. You get to talk to people who are willing to give you an hour of their time to talk to you, who perhaps otherwise you wouldn't get the opportunity to do that. So it's brilliant for reputation, but it's brilliant for you as well. And in this, for middleman, again, it is part of, exactly as you said, that journey of self-discovery. So I've talked to a number of coaches who work with midlife men. I've talked to therapists. I've talked to, individual topic experts in specific fields as well. And the way I approach that podcast is that I think about topics. So yes, I'm interested in people, obviously, but when I scoped out to start with, because when I had the idea, I thought, is there going to be enough to actually do a podcast on this, or am I going to run drive ideas after 5 episodes, So I jotted down this big list, and I came up with, 20, 30 ideas, like off the bat. So I'm like, there's legs in this.
Yeah, that's got legs.
But then I take those topics and I try to find someone who's going to match that topic, who can talk to me about what it is that I want to address that week. So yes, I'm going after the people who are most relevant, and they tend to be, experts in their field, but I'm primarily interested in the topic.
Yes.
Because that's what I think the people who listen to that show are going to be interested in.
And there's a lot of intersecting themes. So I would have thought, that these themes do connect and intersect, because it's not just one thing about, these are big issues that men are facing. Where does sort of modern masculinity fit? Because, the whole notion of being a male now over, decades is changing and redefining at pace. Is that something you've found that, men are struggling with? What it means to be a man?
Yes, I think it's an odd one, because yes, I agree with you. I think men are struggling with their identity, how they fit into the world. And I think this would have applied, and perhaps still does apply to me, despite everything I've learned about this. But I think it's not a conscious thing, put it that way. So it's not like any man has ever approached to me and said, I don't know how I fit into the world in terms of, masculinity. I don't understand my place. I don't understand men's place in the world.
Yeah.
So it's not a conscious thing, but I think...
It's not as specific as that.
It's not, and I have done one or two episodes on this specific topic, and I will come back to it as well, because I do think it's important. And it does lead to that sense of being lost a bit. It's not something that people have come to me and said specifically about.
Yeah. But it also leads, I guess, all of the elements kind of lead to, mental health and isolation. I mean, particularly in the UK. Have you still got a government minister for loneliness? I mean, it's a massive issue. There was some stats out just the other day with young people in America and how isolated and lonely they feel. And the number is, I won't say it because I don't know. I can't remember it because I read so many stats on that report. But it was alarming.
Yeah, it is. Loneliness is a huge, huge problem. And that is one that midlife men, I think, struggle with a lot. I did an episode on this, funnily enough, 2 or 3 weeks ago with someone who's written a book about it, who wrote a book about, it's more about connection, the book, how people connect and why they connect and how you can create better connections. But the underlying theme of that obviously is loneliness, and that's the topic I wanted to cover. In terms of the stats, it depends where you look. Actually, there are different stats, but roughly there was a UK study done, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, that said that roughly 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 men say they have no good friends, which is quite alarming in itself.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the loneliness studies, it's said that something like half of people would say they are lonely at some stage. That doesn't mean everyone at the same time, but it's common. People go through stages of loneliness, and the impact is huge. I mean, the impact on your mental and physical well-being of being lonely, chronically lonely, is massive in terms of, because of the stress it causes. This is the reason for it. And again, whether it's conscious stress or subconscious stress, it causes stress on you and on your body, which increases your risk of things like heart disease and, your mental well-being. So you're, in theory at least, your risks of things associated with poor mental well-being go up. So loneliness is a massive problem. And related specifically to midlife men, I mentioned earlier the suicide statistics. It plays into that. It's not the sole reason for that, but it plays into that, absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess the other part of it is, I mean, if you look at, sense of connection, relationships, you're talking about an amount of people, and it's not a good stat, don't have real friends, couldn't say they've got real friends. And what was it, 1 in 5 or something, did you say? 1 in
4, 1 in 5.
1 in 5, yeah.
I think they have no best friend, yeah.
And I guess, with women get together and talk, and they're more open about what's going on in their life, relationships, health. They talk about health. They talk about, those things. Blokes don't, or notoriously don't. Is that something that comes up in your discussions with coaches and psychologists and stuff?
Yeah, it is. Especially when you talk to like a psychotherapist or a coach, they will say pretty much that getting men to talk is difficult. Once they start talking, they're fine. But that initial step is quite difficult. And they often have said to me, well, people have been, men have ended up in front of them, not of their own volition, because their partners have said, you need to see someone and sort your shit out, or our relationship's not going to last, that sort of stuff, So they end up talking to a coach or a therapist. And once they're there and they start talking, they're fine, but it's not often voluntary. Yeah.
So let's shift gears to how this has changed you. And I'm going to lead you to a LinkedIn post you wrote reasonably recently, I'd like to say, where you said you're now, you've spoken to over 100 men.
Yep.
You've done that research, but you've also spoken to a lot of experts, and you're probably collating all the themes and the issues and the topics that, are all connected, and that you've got potential a number of speaking topics there.
Yeah.
And so it sounded like you were quasi hanging out, your shingle as a speaker in this space, whether it's, a professional speaker and getting paid, or whether you just want to get out and talk more about it and to build a movement. I don't know what the goals are. Get the message out.
Yeah.
Walk us through that. How many episodes of the podcast have you done now?
Roughly 30.
Yeah. So that's a lot of experts you've talked to. You've done your own self-discovery. I mean, not just even in this last year, but obviously this has been a topic on your mind for a long time.
Yeah.
Walk us through this thing. Is this we'll just dip our toe in the water? Is it something you're compelled to do? Do you think it might be a bit of a U-turn and become something that you'll do over and above your day gig of a social and digital marketing consultant? There's about 3 questions in one there.
There is, and they're big questions. How do I answer this? Okay. So, I guess if we... Yeah, okay, let's start with the movement thing. I do see this as something of a movement. This started out as a podcast, and it was an experiment. Because when I launched that show, for all I knew, I could have got 50 people listening to it, and that would have been that. And, okay, well, I tried, sort of thing. I didn't think that would be the case, but it could have been. So it was an experiment. Very quickly, like within 2 months, I realised that actually this is the tip of an iceberg. It really is. The show took off probably within a few weeks. First few weeks was slow, but then suddenly got traction and off it goes. And it now gets between 10 and 15,000 listens a month, which is well beyond what my expectations were when I launched it.
Terrific.
So what it tells me, or what it told me, is, like I said, this is the tip of the iceberg. If this is one... I'm not a networked podcaster. I'm just an independent guy doing this, in my room, sort of thing. Imagine what could happen if you had more time and space to devote to this topic. And I do see it now, as time has progressed, I see it as a movement, absolutely. I see it as a movement of... I'm very passionate about this. I have rediscovered a passion that I thought was missing from my life for a number of years with my work. And I should clarify that and say that I still absolutely do my very best for every single one of my clients, and always will. But this passion has grown into something more than just a side hustle project that is a one-off thing. I mean, I can see this, and I have plans for this. First thing is, it's a book in itself, or more than one book. I've got ideas for about 3 books on this topic already, and I need to start writing, but I need to get some other stuff done first. So that's the first thing. I launched a bi-weekly newsletter off the back of this, which has all sorts of things, like it has guest articles, it has news or around the topics that we cover, it has little short interviews, Q&As with listeners, that sort of stuff. So that goes in it. I have very recently, only about a month ago, launched a private Facebook group for men, for midlife men, where they can be open and talk about stuff. Because, like you said, men don't talk about it, or don't have anywhere they do want to talk about it, because it's very exposing to say some of this stuff. Some of the stuff that I've said to you, most men they don't want to talk about it public, and why should they? So that started. The speaking thing, the problem lies, how do I turn this thing, which at the moment is effectively a hobby, because I'm not earning any money from it, into something that I can make money from. And the reason for making money from it is because I can then do more with it. Because at the moment, more time. I'm doing my day job, right? And which means I've got to fit producing a podcast. Now, you know yourself, to plan, record, edit, publish, promote a podcast is probably 2 days' work for every single episode you do. Now, I've got to fit that in around my job. And I'm not getting paid for it. Which means that I have no time to do other things like write a book and, I don't know, all the other things I love to do off the back of this, and create that movement. And create that movement about... The movement itself is about making men aware that this is coming and what they are going through, because the number of people who say to me, I thought it was just me, which is exactly what I thought. What's wrong with me? Why am I feeling like this?
They're not alone.
The fact is, it's not just me. It's loads and loads of people, but you're not aware of it, and you bloody well should be. So the movement is about that education piece, really. Yes, you could argue you take that a step on and you actually start to help people as well. Now, I'm not a coach or a therapist, so as it stands, that is all referring on to people who know their stuff. Yeah. And maybe it will always be that. But my passion is to make this something that men don't feel so bloody alone about,
Yeah.
But I have to make money in order to do that. And that's where things like speaking comes in. If I can, you're right, that was a very early, the post you read was the first thing I've mentioned about this. Even in order to be able to push that, I need the space to be able to do it. So it's a bit catch-22 at the moment. Yeah, I'm finding myself a bit trapped and frustrated because I don't have the time to invest in it because I need to do my job to earn the money. So it is a bit catch-22 at the moment.
The perils or the fun part of having a side hustle and not the time to put into it. But the great thing is you've got purpose where, a year ago or 18 months ago, you were lacking in that. This has given you purpose. Yep. Ironically, it's giving hopefully other people purpose. So it's a bit of a double whammy in that regard. But what I like about this, and I want people who are listening or if they're watching on YouTube to understand, is that I'm going to take a sidestep here. The power of developing a platform. So what you're doing is developing a platform. It's a media platform. And, we hear about the creator economy and creators and blah, 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 and influencers and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day is you've got a platform. It's a podcast. You've got a newsletter. So you've got subscribers to a podcast. You've got subscribers to a newsletter so you can communicate to them. You're not beholden to Mark Zuckerberg and a social media channel. These are little, this is me, and you'll be nodding your head with this, putting our social media, digital marketing hats on to own a media property, which is basically what you're doing. Yep. And, people around the world have been doing this in their little niches everywhere. And, particularly if your niche is something that you're being passionate about, and we've seen people do it with healthy eating and exercise and all sorts of things. And, you come at it with your own voice. And, what you're in a position to, I think is terrific, is you're kind of curating. You know the topics. You are the audience. And you can convey a lot of this. You're the middleman. You can convey this because a lot of the people you talk to are, therapists and nutritionists and stuff, and they're more on the technical side. And you can be everyday man and help other everyday men understand.
Exactly that.
That's what I'm seeing anyway.
No, exactly that. And I had this question raised to me before Christmas. I did a little session with a coach who I've got to know through the podcast, actually, just about where I wanted to take this and how I would take it and my values and all that sort of stuff. And he raised the question to me about exactly what you said then. And I kind of thought, do you know what? I don't mind being the middleman in the sense of it is ironic, isn't it? It fits two ways. I don't mind being the curator. In fact, because I'm coming at this not from an expert in midlife, if there is such a thing. I don't know that there is, because everyone does their research and has their interest in a specific area of that.
Correct. You're joining dots.
So there's no expert in midlife. People have written books on it, but okay, they tend to be psychologists who've written the books. There's nothing or very little out there from an everyday man who has just encountered stuff and so has personal experience and has talked to all these people and has heard from other people, loads of men who are also going through this. And so, my role is almost a curator. It is a curator. And when I write a book about this, or some books, the first one will be about, it will collate all that stuff. So I am the curator of this, and I'm comfortable with that role. I'm not comfortable with saying I'm an expert in this stuff because I'm not, and I don't believe there is such a thing.
Yeah.
You know?
But what you're doing is connecting dots, which I think it's, and adding insights, and you're doing the research and getting, because you've spoken to 30 people, you can take their quotes, you can, pull threads and, bring things into themes that people can understand. And we talked about a few of them. I mean, loneliness and health and purpose, and it's not just, it tends not to be just one thing with men. It could be a couple, might not be all of them, all the elements.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely,
by joining the dots, men who are in your target audience who have, like you, are going through these things, have got these questions, and they, if they're reading your book and nodding, or listening to you at the moment and nodding, and obviously getting in contact with you, which is even brilliant because, as you know, in podcasting, you can talk into the void, and not everyone talks back, and to have that many people get back in contact with you is absolutely brilliant, and I think testament to the connection and the bond that you're building with them.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right, that I'd podcasted for 5 years or whatever before I started this one, my last podcast. Very rarely did I actually get emails from people. I post on social media about my episodes, and you get conversations going there. But that's not the same thing as getting an email out the blue.
Yep.
And do you know what struck me about most of the emails I get? And I get 2 or 3 a week, or Facebook, in LinkedIn messages or Instagram messages, whatever it is, I get messages. Most of them say thank you. They say, thank you for doing this. You're doing such a good thing. And I get some quite personal stories as well. And it really is touching, honestly, the number of times I've showed my wife some of the messages, because, I had one a couple of weeks ago from a guy who said that, thank you so much for doing this. It's really made me think about how I am and my life. And my wife has seen a difference in me since I've been listening to the podcast. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. It's having an actual impact on people. And that's why I feel even more compelled to do something with this. The problem is it's not easy. I've outlined why it's difficult to do this.
Yeah.
But I'm determined to try. And like I said, if I can be that middleman to bring this all together, I think that's a skill in itself, actually. I shouldn't underplay it. The ability to pull on all those threads and pull things together and make connections and bring insights to it. I think that is a skill in itself. And let's face it, at the moment, in this space at least, no one else is doing it. So why shouldn't I?
Absolutely. I mean, a reason I've done this podcast, I don't think I've talked to people about this before, but I don't think I've ever really said it on the podcast. So you're getting into me to open up. Just talking to you, I'm opening up. But I was at a business breakfast about 7 years ago, and I was talking to a guy. This was where the germ of this idea of this podcast came from. And talking to this guy who had sold his manufacturing business for quite a pretty penny. And I said, what are you doing now? And he said, we set up a social enterprise, and we're helping to build toilets and facilities in third world countries, and there's someone who, and he was in his 50s, he's made the money, but this thing had been obviously sitting there all the time, and now he's got the time, I guess, and luckily the resources to devote to it. But that was the germ of the idea of Crank the Third. That's the, in terms of your professional life, for your first probably 10, 15 years, you don't know as much as you think you do. And then the next 15, you're really hammering it. And that's where, you burn out and you all sorts of issues, and, you have a lot of responsibilities. But then you sort of get into that, that you've done 3 decades worth, and you're sort of, what's next? Do I want to be in corporate for the next, 10, 15 years? Do I want to run my own business? Or if I'm running my own business, is this what I want to do? And or can I reimagine that business and have a portfolio career and do a couple of things? I mean, there's no right or wrong anymore. There's so many different things. And you've just perfectly highlighted, thank you, that this is, you're staying relevant. You're in your 50s, you know what's going on, you're staying relevant, you've got a passion, and you're using today's tools to create what is becoming a movement, and to build a media property. I mean, I love it. This is why I want to talk to people like you, because anyone who's listening, you've got the wisdom and the knowledge, and there's probably a passion play out there for you. And you might be lucky enough that it's your current work, but you can go bigger and more expansive and do things, or you can pull it back a bit if you want. But
I think it's challenging, because when I have broached this topic on the podcast, and actually, funny enough, I'm recording tomorrow on this actual topic of you've got to a stage in your career and you're going, now what? And how do you get past that? Because when I've broached it before a couple of times, I have had people say, well, it's all very well to say you need to find your passion, and you need to, you don't have to work in corporate for the rest of your life or whatever, but actually I need to earn money, and I can't just ditch my job, and there are very reasonable reasons why people feel stuck.
Yeah,
it is challenging, but I agree.
Absolutely,
people want meaning. When you get to our stage in life, you get to a point where, like in my example, maybe in my day job, I don't want to be working on, I don't know, a soft drinks brand, because that's got no meaning to the world. All I'm helping, and this hit me a couple of years ago, this started to really grind at me, is that I would be effectively helping companies to flog stuff that nobody really wants, do they? Whether it's a bit of software or a soft drink or whatever it is, and I know I'm shooting myself in the foot by saying this stuff, but I decided what I'd like to be doing is, in my day job, helping companies that are doing something good in the world. Now, that doesn't have to mean a charity. It can mean a charity. But, for example, at the moment, one of my clients is based in the US, and it's a company that is developing new technologies for cancer research, for early cancer diagnosis. I mean, what a noble mission that is. Yes, I'm doing the same day job effectively, but I'm doing it to help a company that is actually trying to make a difference in the world. That's the sort of stuff. And when you say about your example of a guy goes off to the third world and does, it's the same thing. What he's done is explored something that has meaning. And it's that meaning piece that I think people come to like 50 years old and go, what am I doing? What's my,
exactly.
I don't like the word legacy, but what is my legacy? What?
Yeah. Yeah. And the guy, the manufacturer guy sold his business. I mean, that was just the kernel of the idea. I'm not suggesting people need to sell their business or whatever, but
no.
What it's been, and look, I've followed that path as well. I mean, we've both worked in agencies. We've both worked on, beverage companies and yoga. I always say, I don't need to flog another, yogurt brand or soft drink, as well. And I don't deal with that anymore. And I built, helped build big businesses doing exactly that. If it had beer in the title, then we were flogging it. But it's, these days it's more about, for me, it's about helping credible people who we want to hear from. We hear from the bro marketers and the and the wannabes and the braggarts and the the spotlight seekers and all of these guys and the pretenders, and they're the loud ones. But the people we don't hear are the ones that have been around, who've got the scars on the knuckles, have got the wisdom, the expertise, and I help them get their voice out there. Not necessarily find it. Some might need to find it a little bit, but to get that out. And it's the same thinking. It's still all my skills. It's just my meaning comes from the people I work with, exactly like you. So, these are the
I don't know.
sorts of questions I think we're all maybe asking ourselves.
Yeah. I don't know whether that has changed over the years. It might just be because I've become older and gone through the process, but it feels like that you're right in that the people with the loudest voices are the ones who get the attention now. Now, maybe that was always the case. I don't know. But if I go back, your first question was what you're doing 15 years ago. If I put myself back 15, 20 years, it felt like there was a real community of people who knew their stuff. They were learning on the job as well, but they knew their stuff. They were learning on the job. They shared their learnings publicly. So everyone learned off each other.
Yep.
And it was a community, and that growth happened almost organically.
Organically, yeah.
Now, somewhere in the last 5 years, it feels to me like that's totally gone. Maybe it's the last 10 years, I don't know. But I got to a point where I'm like, I don't want to be battling for attention anymore. Because that's what it became. It was like a battle for who can write the best blog post, or who's got the best podcast, or it's just like I just can't do this anymore. But the downside of that is, I take a step back. So I stopped podcasting 3 years ago, I guess, because when I started podcasting, there weren't that many around actually in my niche. By the time I finished, sort of 4 or 5 years later, there was quite a few, and they were getting more and more. I don't know the words. Competitive is wrong, because competition's fine, but more and more outspoken, and it became a battle. And I'm just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And so, you're right. Now you get very loud voices making a lot of fuss about things, and the people with actual good advice, who have got the experience and have been there, done that, are people like you and me probably, who are not going to do that competition stuff. Then the amount of posts I read on LinkedIn, or things I see, videos of people, I don't want to put younger people down, but I'm going to anyway, 30-year-olds who have probably been doing this stuff for 5 years and have got these great opinions and this new insight, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, we were saying that 10, 15 years ago. But it's presented like this is the new biggest thing, this is the silver bullet, and you're like, no, it's not, it's just another little thing on the... So as you can tell, it frustrates me, but somewhere along the line it's changed. I don't know.
But that said, you don't want to be invisible. Like, we want to hear from voices. I still think there's scope for people who are passionate, genuinely got meaning, passionate about what they do, they're serious about their craft, to stamp their, put a flag in the ground and say, hey, I'm here. And if, you don't have to build the biggest audience. You just have to build an audience with the right people and bring others along for the journey. And, that's what you're doing, clearly. If you said, I want to be invisible, I don't want to do anything, think of all the people, whose help you are giving who wouldn't get that help. So, sometimes when it might sound nasty, but when people, you generally hear, I don't want to do any of this, I don't want to put my ideas or whatever. I say, well, that's fine, but, if you've got all this knowledge and wisdom, isn't it a bit selfish not to share it? You can look at it in a couple of ways. And
you can.
If people are inspired to get out and do stuff and embrace technology and embrace AI and not run away from any of these things, but stay true to yourself, because at this time of your life, you're probably starting to, you talked about, your values and things like that, have a bit of a think about what your values are. If you still got aspirations, have you got aspirations to do something different? It could be over and above your job. The amount of people I'm seeing now are doing portfolio careers, because that's the world now. You can work from anywhere in the world. People are doing exactly that, or go in the country like yourself, and they've got portfolios. They might speak, they might consult, they might advise, they might create products. There's no limits to what we can do, and I think the people best position to do it are people who have been around the block 30 years. If just because you're at that age too, doesn't mean, this whole ageism thing and people saying, well, you've got to take notice of these people. Yeah, but not if you don't stay relevant.
Yeah.
You don't get there by sheer dent of your age. Yeah. That might open the door, but you've still got to be relevant. You've still got to have passion. You've still got to do stuff, You can't be walking backwards,
No, I agree. And I think, I was thinking about this just the other day. I was thinking with middleman specifically, the benefit or the advantage I have, bearing in mind everything I just said, is that my audience is middle-aged people.
Yeah.
Now, therefore, you don't get all the big shouting and bravado and stuff because they're all people like you and me, right? So I don't have that competition of all the shouting and all that stuff. It's not there.
True.
That doesn't mean it won't come, but I don't think it will because, even if there are new entrants into this space, they're going to be more considered people. So
because of the topic, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of territory here, Paul. Thank you. I may have got on my soapbox a couple of times. I don't often do that, but
that's good.
Thanks for getting that out of me. I feel better. I feel more relaxed now. I just wanted to, just because we're talking about creating. Essentially, what you're doing is you're creating this media property. It just happens to be a podcast, but you also have the book end of the newsletter, which I think is terrific. And boy, going back to Facebook, mate, Facebook groups.
I know. Tell me about it.
I went back to the future.
I went there because middle-aged men are on Facebook.
I know.
That's the only reason.
I know. You got to go where your audience is. Rule number one. Okay. Exactly. What's just a couple of tips that you can give people if there's someone out in the audience who, liking the idea of getting into having an owned media property, which would be a blog, a newsletter, a podcast. I put YouTube in that, even though you don't own YouTube, but you own the videos and you can put them elsewhere. Depending on their modality of choice, what's some tips you give people about how to start a podcast, what to think about when doing it?
Okay. With specific regard to podcasting, the first thing is to research what other podcasts are out there on the topic you want to talk about. Like I said, with Middleman, there's virtually nothing. Not in the way I wanted it done. Well, actually, no, that's another point. So firstly, it's what's out there now. You'll find something anyway, whether it's a lot or a few. There will be stuff.
If there's none, there might be no interest.
Yeah, exactly. But then it's to listen to those and think, does this resonate with me? Is this what I want to hear on whatever topic it is? For me, it wasn't. The ones I discovered were relatively low production values, so they weren't great to listen to, poorly edited, tended to be a couple of guys chatting about stuff, which went off on wild tangents, and it just... I personally, I didn't get anything from them. Other people might, but you're looking at it with your view. Yep. So if you want to start a podcast, find what's out there. Can you be different to what is already out there? Now, whether that is better production values, whether it is talking to different people, bigger guests, is it? So, for example, with my old podcast, I used to love doing more narrative style podcasts because most podcasts are things like this, you and me talking, and that's what I do in Middleman as well now. It's you and me talking about a topic or a couple of people, that's your podcast. I used to love doing narrative styles where I would still talk about a topic, but I'd interview 3 people and then interweave different bits. It takes a lot of work. Really does take a lot of work.
It's called building a rod for your own back. I love it too.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not that committed.
No, it used to take me 3 times as long to do an episode, and I just didn't have the time. I used to love doing them. But the point being, what I saw was everyone's doing interview podcasts, so do something different. So that would be the next thing. Look at what's out there. Is there a different way of doing it? You have to be aware of the time it's going to take. So plan it properly. You can start off by doing something fairly cheaply with cheap gear and throw it out there to see what happens. But I always think if you're going to do these things, do it properly. Spend some time planning it. thinking about it. But they're the two big things, really, is just being aware of what's out there. And the other thing, I guess, is, like I said, I made this long list of topics. So I knew that 5 or 6 episodes in, I'm not going to run out of material. I've got enough to go for 20 episodes. That tells you there's legs in a topic that you're going to do. So they're the main things, I think, to start off anyway.
Yeah. And have some themes in mind, that you have the topic sitting under themes is a good way to start categorising your thinking, and otherwise it can get a bit overwhelming. So good advice there. Paul, been terrific to catch up, mate. We'll direct people to Middleman Podcast. What about the newsletter?
Yeah, everything is, I say everything. If you go to middlemanpodcast.com, you can sign up to the newsletter there. I will very shortly, if I ever get the time, be giving that a total revamp, because I need to put some extra stuff on there, because it's not obvious where the blog is, it's not obvious where to get to Instagram. It's all kind of hidden because I threw that website together quite quickly. But anyway, middlemanpodcast.com is kind of the central place.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Much appreciated, sir.
You're very welcome.